Before we go into the podcast, I want to just talk about a business that I've set up with my friend George. It is called the Podcast Introduction Group. So if you want to join and be able to be featured on 24 to 48 podcasts to be able to reach an amazing audience, this is the place you need to go to. Podcast, being a guest on podcasts, is automatically establishing you as an authority and is able to build your personal and professional brand. We handpick of a bank of podcasters that we have to be able to grow your business and brand. We do 100% of everything that needs to be done by my team. You do not need to lift a finger. You are able to expose yourself to new and relevant markets by going on other people's podcasts. You also are able to create brand loyalty. People will love listening to you and coming back to your products or services, and it's able to increase your revenue. So if you want to be able to get involved, you can sign up quickly, registered with an account manager. There's an onboarding call where we target the podcasts that you want to be on, the type that you want, whether it's entrepreneurship, business, health, fitness, whatever it is. We then match you to those podcasts and you can start your journey. We have regular catch-ups with our account managers, and Google ranks you when people search for you. So when people are searching for you, you're able to see your podcasts at the top of the list. So if you're interested in being a podcast guest on multiple podcasts, we are the place to go. If you go to podcastintroduction.com and go and register your details, we will have a quick call with you, match your podcast that you want to be on, and we can then start this process ASAP. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Back onto the podcast then. Just one last thing before we go into the podcast. I just wanted to talk to you about the fact that I have a YouTube channel that has been going for quite some time, and I am recording and releasing all of my interviews with some short videos as well on YouTube. So please do check it out. YouTube on Absolute Business Mindset. You'll see a bunch of interviews there, all the longer format interviews and some short videos as well. So please enjoy that. And here goes with the podcast interview. This podcast will educate and inspire with stories of entrepreneurs' journey, and we also explore their why. You will learn from successes and failures to be the best version of yourself. Today we have David Carter again for his second part of our conversation. Hello, David. How are you today?
I'm extremely well, Mark. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me today. As I say, this is going to be a part two because there were certain areas which I thought that it needed to go into, for example, your book and to Entelechy Academy, that we never really touched base that much on in the first interview. And I really wanted to give you time and space to be able to talk about them today. So we're going to go straight into it, and we'll go straight into the book Breakthrough. So why don't you tell me a little bit about what the book is about and what was the inspiration?
Many years ago, I met a chap who's Australian, who lives in Cincinnati, called Matthew Kelly. And Matthew has written 19 books that have sold more than 1 million copies.
Right.
His bestseller has sold more than 19 million copies. And all of his work was about personal development. And one day I used the phrase becoming the best version of yourself, which he then decided he was going to copy and clone. And we became very good friends over a number of years and mutual mentors. And he kept saying to me, "You really ought to write a book, David. You really ought to write a book." Which, given the high bar which he'd set, I was thought, who'd ever read a book that I wrote? I'm not really sure I've got anything to say. And that's part of what I want to share with people, is that we can often hide and think, oh, who'd want to listen to what I've got to say? Who'd read anything that I ever wrote? But actually, lots of people end up reading what you wrote and writing to you and thanking you for doing it. And so, overcoming that imposter syndrome that no one would be interested is really the gap between not writing a book and writing a book. And anyway, it's actually a very funny story. So I this was about 12, 13 years ago. I had to go into hospital for a day or so to have a procedure in my neck. And I was going to be, after the operation, I got home, I had to basically do nothing for a month and lounge on my sofa. And I ended up having a Zoom call a day or so after I got home from hospital with Matthew. And he said, "Right, mate, now's a good time to write that book." And so, slightly cabin fever crazy, that I had nothing to do and could hardly move around, I thought, oh, well, I could probably sit up on the sofa and put a laptop down and maybe I could write this book. And anyway, I decided, I think we talked last time about how I ended up bringing my children up on my own from when they were 7 and 3. I thought, well, if no one else ever in the world reads this book, I'm going to write a book for my children and pass on to them in a book form, And so, anyway, 11 days later, 110,000 words were in a manuscript. And I was literally doing it 12, 15 hours a day for 10 days. And by the 12th day, I was absolutely exhausted.
I was going to say, you're
I was stuck on the sofa with nothing else to do and nowhere else to go. And on the 12th day, I took a day off. And on the 13th day, I read what I had typed. And I thought, you know what? There is actually a book in here somewhere. And one of my best friends is a lady called Jenny, we've known each other for 25 years, and she's actually involved in Entelechy and every other business I've ever had. And she used to be a personal development book editor. Okay. So I asked her if she'd like to have a look at it. And she rang me back a few days later and said, "Wow, there's a great book in here. Would you like me to help you edit it?" And I said, "Oh, yes, please." So a few weeks later, when I was able to get up and move around, I actually paid for Jenny to come over to Europe, and we spent 2 weeks knocking the book into shape. And when it was all finished, I was really happy with it and really proud of it. And so I got 5 copies made, one for Matthew to get him off my back and say, "Here, I've written my book," one for Jenny, who'd helped me edit it, one for each of my 2 children, and one for me. Job done. I've written my book. What I didn't know was that Matthew sent the book to his publishers.
Right.
And a few weeks later, they contacted me and said, "We love your book. We'd like to publish it." And so, anyway, it got published. It ended up being a bestseller. I ended up doing 2 years of book tours, speaking tours, all related to the book. And essentially, it was 20 chapters, 20 breakthroughs that I wanted to write to my children. And each chapter had a story that people could relate to about my own personal life and this particular breakthrough concept, some tools and techniques about how to develop themselves through that breakthrough. And genuinely, if you'd asked me 2.5, 3 years ago, to write a book, I would have been very shy, and I would have said, "Oh no, I don't think that's for me." And even though lots of people have said, "Oh, you should write a book," I was probably quite, modest and shy and imposter syndrome. But 2 years later, I'd got over 1,000 emails from around the world.
Wow.
What's now 114 countries, where people said, "Oh, I bought your book at the airport," or whatever, and this is chapter 7 changed my life, and here's what I've done. And they wrote me all these wonderful stories about how a particular chapter or a particular idea. And I think that the joy of knowing that you've somehow helped someone else in any small way is one of the greatest joys of life. And so, even though I didn't think I'd ever write it, even though I thought no one would ever read it, all these years later, I still get emails, probably 1 a month these days, from someone, and I always reply, and they always say, "Oh gosh, I didn't expect a reply from you." And I'm really glad I wrote the book. I'm really glad that my children read it and loved it. And I'm really glad glad that lots of other people have read it and benefited from it.
So the book is about lessons about breakthroughs in your life, or it's specifically your life you're talking about?
We'll be back after a quick break.
Hi, I'm Alex, the host of X Health Show. Meet the future of healthcare. Think X-Men, that's X Health. Actual superheroes behind programming living cells to cure cancer once and for all. Tech that detects preterm delivery in seconds, brain-computer interface, or apps that employ AI to match you, your disease, with the best treatment. X Health Show brings to you visionaries who push the boundaries of healthcare from Switzerland, the heart of Europe and the most innovative country in the world. Let me introduce you to their startups. Head to X Health Show, meet the future of healthcare. Happy to greet you there.
They are generic breakthroughs that I felt that anybody would encounter during their life and maybe get stuck with. And whether you're a CEO of a large multinational or a student nurse or anyone in between, they were generic potential speed bumps that people might have in their life that I wrote a breakthrough chapter about how to overcome that speed bump.
Okay, amazing. So I've spent a bit of time with you now, David, and one of the things that I'm most astonished by is your humility and the way you understate everything you've done. You've run large companies, you've run small companies, you've been successful, you've written a book. When I was looking through your LinkedIn doing my research, I noticed that one of the people who gave you a recommendation was Kevin Ellis, who's the chairman of PwC. Now, I worked at PwC for a number of years, and and when you start looking at those people who are giving genuine responses to you, these people are really impressive people. These are people with a lot of status, a lot of experience, lots of knowledge that are referring to you, David, as a huge help, a huge guide to them to be able to overcome issues or have those breakthroughs in their lives. I just think I suppose there is a question here somewhere in the fact that you've done so many great things. How have you stayed so humble and understated?
I don't know if I've got an answer to that.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a serious part of the answer to that, which is in my family, when I was growing up, both of my parents were very keen that, don't stand out from the crowd, don't show off, don't be big-headed. And so I think that was a sort of parental family guidance that I was adhered to.
Right.
And interestingly enough, I didn't write my book and release my book until after my mother had passed away. And one of the reasons I held back to release it until after my mother had passed was because I actually didn't want my mother to turn around and say, well, why would anyone read your book? What have you got to say? Because actually I knew that people would read my book and appreciate it. So there's a little bit of parental programming.
Sure.
When I left when I left primary school, and I didn't pass the 11 plus to get in automatically, but I was one of those marginal cases where I got in on an interview. That's because I'm highly dyslexic, but reasonably intelligent. But I've still got this somewhere. But my headmaster, who I think really genuinely liked me and was happy I'd got into grammar school, he wrote a comment which was, when David goes to his new school, he should remember that it's not the one who knows the most that has the most to say. And so that also guided me when I went to senior school, that, I might have known more than other people, but that didn't mean you had to talk about it or say anything. And so I think that was, again, ingrained into me. But I think it goes back to something I said a few minutes ago, is that the greatest joy that I've ever found is helping other people. And my personal life credo is make yourself useful.
Right.
And it doesn't matter whether it's your next door neighbor or someone in your village or someone in your community or your family or your work or your customer base or whatever. It's if every interaction you have with everybody, your mindset is, how can I make myself of service to you, of use to you? And I think generosity means that you don't ever want anything back from the person that you have, if you like, been generous to.
Yeah.
And so in my early 20s, I started being fascinated by Buddhism, and I learned and karma. And so I think that, it's easy to look at a LinkedIn profile and go, oh my gosh, this person's had a golden escalator, life where they've gone from one success to the next one. But what no one ever writes on their LinkedIn profile is all the train crashes and near disasters and ups and downs of life and being an entrepreneur. And one of the things that I really enjoy is getting together with one or two friends who are themselves, successful entrepreneurs. And we never, ever gloat about the successes. We only ever talk about the war stories and how close to disaster that was and how we managed to luckily get out of it. And, one of the questions I'm often asked is, what do you think, David, is the secret of your success? And I wouldn't define myself as successful at all. I've always worked very hard. I've always tried very hard. I've always given everything my best shot. Not everything's worked out. If it hasn't worked out, I've got back on the horse and had another go.
Yeah.
But actually, genuinely, I'm much more motivated to make a difference to others than I am to me. And I think I've always been genuine. I think I've always been authentic. I think I've always been honest and real. And I think people trust that they can talk to me about anything confidentially. And I also think, because of my own life experiences, which have been amazing, I've always, in my mentoring conversations, been much more of a mentor than a coach. It's like I don't hold back at all and tell them what I really think. And I'm pretty brutal sometimes. And they really appreciate that honesty, transparency, directness. And so, anyway,
No, that's a good answer.
grateful for the feedback. But at the end of the day, I'm a normal bloke who puts his trousers on one leg at a time. I don't eat kryptonite for breakfast. And at the end of the day, going back to my secret of success is I work really hard. I try very hard. I genuinely try and make a difference to people. And it works more than it doesn't. And that's what drives me and motivates me. So I think actually, as much as anything else, it's about perseverance and resilience. And being the last one standing.
Absolutely. And I think that's what persistence and sort of consistency are things that some people don't prioritize. And I think that's super important, whatever the endeavor is, whatever the business is that you're running, sort of persistence. And
can I tell you a very quick story, which your listeners might like to try for themselves, but don't do it very often these days, every now and again. But we used to have dinner parties, and we used to say to everyone, if there were 6 people at the dinner party, will you please bring 6 copies of your CV? And so, what do you want that for? Well, it's a game. So everyone used to bring 6 copies of their CV, and then we'd staple all 6 together and give everyone a copy of everybody's CVs. And then over dinner, you had 10 minutes to tell a story about what wasn't in your CV.
Right. And
people would say, well, actually, it says I left company A then and joined company B, but actually I was fired from company A. I didn't resign. And here's why I was fired. And they tell the story about it. And that used to be the best dinner parties that anyone had ever been to, because of the transparency and the honesty and the vulnerability and the laughter. And so, anyone can pretend that they're made of bulletproof, whatever, and super successful. But when I was at Merrick, my mentoring company, and we used to hire, former CEOs, FTSE 100 and other CEOs, one of the key questions in interviewing them was, well, you've obviously had a fantastic career and it's been amazingly successful, but tell me about a disaster, that you've had in your life. And if any one of them ever turned around and said, well, I've never had a disaster, it's just been all successes. Oh, well, sorry, you won't work in our company because we need to help mentees when they're going through a crisis. And if you've never been through one, how can you empathize or be supportive to them? Mm. And they were shocked that we would not hire someone who had never had a problem.
I think that's so true. And I think this is why I do the podcast, is to hear the successes, obviously, because it's good to hear what people have achieved, but equally the failures or the stumbling blocks or the road humps that actually are there to slow you down or sometimes stop you. That's the greatness of this podcast, is that it gives plenty of opportunity. We have 45 to 60 minutes with people to talk about their successes and their failures, because that's a whole life. If you just talk about the successes, that's not the true reflection of your life. And I know you've been vulnerable in the episode before about your previous business, which didn't go well. So I just want to thank you at this stage. Thank you very much for your vulnerability and sharing all of those stories. So that's just on a side note. I wanted to touch on Entelechy. So it's an academy that you've set up. Why don't you tell me a little bit? This is your current business that you're working on. Why don't you tell me a little bit about it?
Well, entelechy is a word that was coined by Aristotle, the philosopher, 2,500 years ago. And the entelechy of an acorn is an oak tree. The entelechy of a caterpillar is a butterfly. And so the entelechy of Mark Hayward is the ultimate version of Mark, with all of his potential fully actualized.
Right, nice.
And Aristotle also coined another phrase, which was that our character determines our destiny. And what he meant by that was wherever we end up in life is a direct function of our character. And so we help people become their entelechy by developing their character. Throughout my 15 years at Merrick and the 10 years of mentoring after Merrick, I realized that it was character which was going to determine the destiny of my mentoring clients.
Right.
If you mentor someone like Kevin Ellis, or I mentored the CEO of the world's biggest platinum mining company with 98,000 employees and other large multinational companies, what could I teach him about mining platinum? He had the world's leading experts, but what he needed was help to be a better leader of a high-performance team that was publicly quoted. And so all of the things we worked on to develop him to be a high-performance leader were his character. And a bit like lots of things in my life, which you kindly referred to earlier, but I didn't know that was what I was doing. It was just coming out of me innately. And then the other mentors in the organization used to say, write all these down, David. What are these character qualities? And so I ended up writing them all down. And that's how we ended up with this IP of the 54 character qualities that underpin the development of everything. And so, what's the research behind this? Well, it was 25 years of mentoring and putting it into practice with clients and seeing that it absolutely worked. And so not only had I unintentionally created this framework of 54 character qualities, but I'd got hundreds of stories about clients over the years who'd needed to become more confident or more analytical or disciplined or whatever it was, and how that had benefited them. So I had lots of case studies and testimonials about how the development of individual character qualities drove greater performance. And after 25 years of doing that, I was chomping at the bit to democratize it and move it beyond a half a dozen to a dozen super expensive fee-paying individual clients and democratize it and make it available to the whole world. And so it took several years after deciding that's what I was going to do to figuring out how to do it, which is what Entelechy is, the output of all of that thinking.
Yeah.
But essentially, we've created a program which lasts 14 months, which is split into two parts, the first 2 months and then the next 12 months, The first 2 months is we call Discover, and we will do a 180, 360 of every single employee in the organization, of their character quality strengths. Which ones of the 54 character qualities do you see as your own strengths, and which ones do you think you'd benefit from working on, which we call growth opportunities. Then we get everyone to ask at least 10 people in their network, their colleagues, their family, their friends, to do a 360. So now they can compare, how do I see myself versus how other people see me, which is often joyful because, 8 of their assessors might see them as being kind or generous or whatever it is, but they never seen themselves like that. Now they can step into that. But it also throws up that 6 of your assessors think you need to be working on being more disciplined or confident or whatever it is. So, right, okay, well, now I agree with them. I ought to work on it. But they also have a chance to say what they think the character qualities are of the company that they work for today, and what they'd like the company's character qualities to be in the future. And so that is 15.7 million data points on a company with 500 people. It's the richest set of data on who really works for you, not what their CV says, but who they really are as a person.
Yeah.
As validated not only by them, but by peers and colleagues and family and friends.
Yeah.
So a company can see, well, here's how Mark sees himself. Here's how other people see Mark, and the delta between the two. Here's how Mark sees the company today, and here's how Mark would like to see the company in a year's time. And they can have that whole data set for every individual person and the entire organization added up together. And then, there's no set of data that anyone's ever seen as rich as that on the people and their humanity. And then together with the organization, we design a transform program which takes them from where they are today to where they want to be in a year's time. So they will optimize their performance and productivity and profitability through optimizing the potential of the character of every single individual in that organization.
So it is a sort of business transformation, but instead of having a transformation within, I don't know, HR systems or like culture, you're actually trying to drive the company towards where the company wants to go, and that's as a collective, as broken down within individuals.
Right, but we're doing that through creating a personalized, individualized learning journey for every single employee,
right,
to get them from where they are today to where they want to get to in the future, and where the company would like them to get to in the future, such that where the people want to go and where the company wants to go is the same thing, and which produces higher performance, productivity, and profitability.
So how do you weight the sort of importance of, if you've got a large corporate and you've got a pool of talent, like what's sometimes described as talent, the people that are earmarked for leadership further down the line, versus secretarial staff or PA staff versus juniors, that graduates that have just joined? How do you marry up the sort of the results from someone who's been in the company for 5 years and is deemed to be leadership quality potential versus someone who's been there for 20 years in a office management role? How do you marry up the diversity in the workplace?
Well, that has all been designed into the discovery process. That's how we end up with 15.7 million data points. And so we will know you are Mark, you work in HR, or you work in finance, or you work in sales or marketing or production or whatever. We'll know that you've been in the company more than 5 years, but less than 10 years, that you're a male, that you're this, we'll know everything about you. But also, we will also look at the character qualities for the role, for every single role.
Okay.
And so it could be that Mark has got quite a lot of the character qualities needed in the role he's currently in.
We're just having a quick break from the episode today. Thank you so much for joining me today. What I want you to do is, can you do one thing for me? Can you go and text one of your friends a link to the show, whether it's on Apple or Spotify or any other of the podcast providers, and text a friend of yours that you love this show and they should be listening to it. It's a simple request, and I really would appreciate if all you do is give that text to a friend, family member or colleague. And lastly, if you do want to see more information about the podcast, go to absolutebusinessmindset.com. Right, back to the interview.
But actually, we've got a vacancy in another department where he's got all 10 character qualities already as strengths. And so we can help solve the retention problem. We don't need to leave, Mark. Look, we've got an opening over here that is going to tick all your boxes and tick all of ours too. You're going to tick all of ours. So we can optimize the talent throughout the organization. In other words, get the right people on the right seat on the bus.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been staggered over the last couple of years, and it's getting worse and worse, the percentage of people who join a company and leave in the first year. And it's between 40 and 60%. And some retail organizations, it's 80%.
Wow.
And so if you could filter people who join your organization by saying, well, here's the role description and here's the character qualities that we want to see you demonstrate, they can get applicants to do our 14-day free trial on our app and get their own 360 and their own signature done and submit that along with their application. So the people who've got the best match will get called into for the interviews first. And actually, when they turn up and the interviewer is saying, well, look, here's 10 character qualities you need to succeed in this role. And look, you've got 9 of them. So you're going to be a good fit for us. And by the way, where do you want to develop your career and how can we assist you with that, the retention and development of you? It's really, I think it's beautiful that something so simple and so elegant, which is so old, going back to Aristotle, has, the one comment we get from enterprise buyers is, why has no one ever thought of this before? It's so clever and it isn't. Well, everyone said that about cat's eyes in the road.
But there does seem to be some sort of marrying up from sort of Myers-Briggs, the sort of psychometric tests. Were they the sort of the earliest types? Because I remember doing Myers-Briggs 20 odd years ago, and at that stage we were working on building a team in the company that I was in, and we all did the Myers-Briggs to see where our skill set, where our sort of personality fitted, whether we were going to have a successful team by using those sorts of tests. Is this now sort of Myers-Briggs on steroids? That's just the data points are vaster and the collection of the data that you can absorb and be able to then give results for potential development, self-development. Is it essentially a psychometric test on steroids?
No. So don't tell me, but do you remember what your Myers-Briggs profile was?
No, it was a long time ago. I can't remember the letters.
Well, I'm going to guess that you're an INFJ, so you can look it up afterwards.
I will.
So first of all, the thing with any of those personality profiles, from StrengthsFinder to Myers-Briggs to, all of the Belbin, they only rely on 180 information. And so all of them can be gamed, because if I know that you're looking for an ENTJ, I know how to answer the questions in my Myers-Briggs to prove I'm an ENTJ. So they're all very gameable, and it's only 180. So the first thing we've done that has dramatically changed the landscape is we've added in a 360.
Yeah, got it.
So it doesn't matter how you see yourself. I mean, you could be completely delusional and see yourself as X, which might be what I'm looking for as a recruiter.
Yeah.
But if I then saw everybody else's 360 of you and nobody sees you like that, guess what? You're probably not like that, even though you present yourself as being like that. So the first thing is we've added in 360.
Right.
The second thing we've done is that when people give their 360 feedback on either a strength or a growth opportunity, they have to give some context. So, I see Mark as being organized because Every meeting I ever turn up to that Mark is organizing, there's an agenda. He has this no attender, mantra. He always sends the minutes of the meeting out within half an hour of the meeting finishes with action plans and all the rest. So he's super hyper organized. So I'm not just saying it's a strength, I'm giving an example.
Yeah.
And so the context is also king. And so first of all, 360, second context. But the other thing as well is all of those other personality profiles, they're all about what you do, not who you are.
Right.
And what we've done is go to that domain underneath the doing skills to the being skills that are really who Mark truly, genuinely is.
So how would you describe, if we were doing a quick assessment of you, who are you? How would you define yourself? What would you say your characteristics are?
Character qualities. How do I describe myself? Whenever I'm asked that question at a cocktail party or, oh, who are you? What do you do? Something. And this is, my answer actually would change in the last few years compared to the last 20 years. But my automatic answer is, well, I'm a dad. I've got 2 children who, maybe I mentioned I'm bringing up on my own, but, that was my primary role in life, to be a good dad. Perhaps I can answer the question slightly the other way around, which is I'm often asked which of the 54 character qualities are the most important to me.
Right.
And I've probably got 5 of the 54, which are really personal and deeply important to me. I mean, they're all important, but some are more important than others.
Sure.
I think it's really important to be curious. I think it's really important to be open-minded. I think it's really important to be honest, kind, and collaborative.
Okay,
now, we could go on and talk about all of the other character qualities, and they're all important too. And I think I've got many of them as strengths. I'm super hyper organized, but I wouldn't say, oh, I'm a super hyper organized person. But I'd like to think that people recognized and appreciated me, that I'm curious, open-minded, kind.
Has one of them is honesty. Has honesty ever got you into trouble by being too honest in certain circumstances?
Yes, particularly with my parents when I was a kid growing up, and which was always terrible because my mother always used to say honesty is the best policy, and it didn't always work out like that.
I had exactly the same. I had a similar conversation with my mother where she'd always give this honesty is the policy. I'd tell her the honesty. It's like, almost, I wish you hadn't said that.
Yeah, I'd only get 3 smacks on my butt with a wooden spoon instead of 10. It seemed to be.
But giving feedback to one of your mentees, has that ever because often honesty can be characterized as sometimes bluntness. I don't necessarily think it has to be, but it can be. But giving someone those a mentee to you, the honesty side of your personality, has that caused ruffled feathers in your mentees?
No, not really. I think that, you've got to combine being honest with being compassionate and kind. But at the end of the day, let's say you were sitting down with a mentoring client who just got their 360 results, and their respondents see them very different to how they see themselves. A good coach would tease out of them, well, why do you think people might see you like this, and versus how you see it. But if at the end of the day a difficult conversation was required, then as a mentor you can't hide from that, and maybe you have to accept sometimes you're going to catch up with someone next week. Well, this is going to be a good thing for them to think about for a week and be with for a week. And so I've got to leave this meeting knowing that it was an uncomfortable ending to the meeting, but it's not gone past the point where we're going to fall out and not speak to each other ever again. And hopefully next week when we get together, I can say, well, what were your reflections on how our conversation ended last week? And 99 times out of 100 people say, no, do you know what? The feedback I got from everyone was absolutely spot on, and I can be a bully, or I can be like this, or I can be over demanding, whatever. and I don't like the fact that's how everybody sees me, and I'm going to make some changes. So I don't think it never got me into trouble. Often it put you in a difficult cliff edge situation where you thought, well, you needed to hear this, and I'm the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. But I think if you did it with passion and kindness and honesty all wrapped up together, then you were leaving the person with an opportunity to sit with it and live with it for a week or a day or so until you caught up with them. And 99 times out of 100, they accepted the feedback and recognized it was something they wanted to work on. So, but, you know, bringing my kids up on my own, you know, I just had to accept sometimes that, you know, one or either of them might not like the decision I'd made, where there'd been something happen at school or whatever, and they go to their bedroom and slam the door and didn't want to come down for supper. And you just have to live with it for a few days because you knew you were right and they had to hear that truth and they didn't want to hear it, but, you know, life would still be okay by Thursday. But yeah. I think the real issue here is honesty with self. Much more important than honesty with others. I mean, they're both important. But until you can be honest with yourself, you know, this isn't working, I'm not enjoying this, so there's got to be a better way. Until you're honest with yourself, the rest is, you know, it isn't as important. And I'm a very reflective person. I'm in Myers-Briggs, I'm a very off the charts introvert. I need time on my own. I really enjoy walking my dog, and one of my colleagues, Amy, she always calls it the washing machine. And I say, oh, I'm going to take the dog for a walk this afternoon. I'm going to put this item and this item in the washing machine. And I've got no idea what I'm going to, and by the, 8, 9 o'clock that evening, after a couple of hours of walking and reflecting, it's like they fall out the washing machine, all washed and clean. I've now got clarity about what to do about that one and that one. So I'm naturally reflective, but if something isn't working or is working, but particularly if it isn't working, I've got to look within and say, well, what's my role in this? What could I be doing better? And so interesting enough, I had a 360 done of me in our company 2 or 3 months ago. We do it every 6 months.
Right.
And, 10 people, 11 people filled it out. And everybody in the entire company sees one of my strengths as being visionary and pioneering and purposeful and all the things you'd expect of, an entrepreneur like me. And, there was huge agreement about my strengths. But when it came to my growth opportunities, not more than 2 people ever selected the same growth opportunities. So from 11 people, I had 20 or 30 growth opportunities. And I thought, that's interesting that 11 people can see 20 or 30 growth opportunities, but there's no consistency. And as I thought, well, why is that? So I went for a think about that on a walk, and I came back and I had an epiphany. It's not that is a growth opportunity that I need to work on for everybody, but it is with Rachel for that one. It is with Amy for that one. It is with Kaylin for that one. It is with Teresa for that one, with Jake for that one. And they've got a very valid point of view that in the context of my relationship with them and that role, they'd like to see me a bit more X or a bit more Y, even though I perhaps am like that with other people, but they want me to dial it up with them.
Yeah. And
so having the ability to be honest with myself and be reflective and go, why did she say that? What's the context? Or why did he say that? And so I think self-honesty is really important.
I think that's very true. And I want to cover 2 points before we finish today. And the first one is about emotional intelligence. How important do you think? Because it was a buzzword 3 or 4 years ago, and it's still consistently coming up as very important for leaders to be now emotionally intelligent. And previously, the leader was this almost stoic character that was almost untouchable, and now we're looking for our leaders to show vulnerability and things like that. What's your view on how business people are developing and how intelligence?
We haven't got time to answer that question properly. So first of all, I think you've painted leaders in a very narrow, corner. And, if you're Mick Lynch, who's the leader of the train strikers at the moment, who's got one thing on his brain, he doesn't need to be emotionally intelligent at all. He just needs to be persistent, on his goal. And I think you've characterized leaders way too oversimplistically. I think that if you are Klaus Schwab and in charge of the Great Reset, you're going to have a different set of leadership values and EQ requirements than if you're the head of a hospital emergency ward sort of thing. So I don't think you can apply the same set of things to every leader. I think that EQ, emotional intelligence, very simplistically, is how self-aware are you?
Right.
And how aware are you of the impact that you have on other people? And I would say that very few people at the top in business that I've ever met are really that good when I sort of started working and even been self-aware, let alone aware of the impact they have on other people. And there are organizations that hire people who they don't want to be particularly EQ savvy. They just want to get the share price doubled and the revenues up and the profits up. And if that means being a bulldozer and creating mayhem for 3 years, that's what the board want. And so I think that what I'd like to see is the world raising its consciousness to solve all the problems we're raising, and doing that through developing their character. And so I think every individual person needs to think about their own self-leadership and being more self-aware and aware of the impact that what they do on other people. And so I don't think it just applies to the senior leadership team, it applies to everybody.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I deliberately had to simplify the question simplify the emotional intelligence for the question. But I think that's really important, because we've seen that through the political sphere with last 3 prime ministers, all completely different, from Boris Johnson to Liz Truss to Rishi Sunak, and a different type of leader that was felt was needed in the political sphere. And I think from Boris Johnson, who was very maverick, to Liz Truss, she was trying to do something quite radical, and now we've got Rishi Sunak, who's a manager. In essence, he's a stable force in the political sphere. So I do think you're right. I think when leaders are put into positions, they're often voted in, or they're given the position on what they can achieve within that next period, whether it's a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 10 year period. So I would 100% agree with your assessment that each leader sometimes needs different things, and therefore that selection, that element of emotional intelligence is very dependent on what the people.
Very, very quickly.
Yes.
A couple of years ago, we did a very thorough, comprehensive global UK YouGov survey. And we said, in the middle of the pandemic, if you think about the situation we find ourselves in, stack rank these 54 character qualities in terms of what you'd like to see in the leadership that we've got today, in government, in politics, and everywhere, in the health service, to solve this problem for us. And people stack rank them. The next one was thinking about the leaders we've got today. Please stack rank what you think their growth opportunities are, the things they need to work on. And 9 of the top 10 mirrored each other. So in other words, what people wanted to see in a leader to get us through the crisis was exactly what the leadership we had didn't have.
Yeah. So interesting. Look, the last question I want to ask you is about something that you've mentioned a few times over the 2 conversations we've had, and it kind of loops back to you again. Is about the dyslexia. You've mentioned a couple of times that you have dyslexia and how it's impacted your upbringing, your education, and your businesses. Do you believe that your dyslexia is now your superpower? A lot of people, when they talk about their sort of things that have been difficult situations or difficult conditions and things, they say that they now see them as a superpower. Do you think your dyslexia is your superpower?
It's a component in it. It's a component. I think that, dyslexic people think differently to the way we're schooled.
Yeah.
And so you don't fit in at school because you don't follow the system. But once you get released from school, you can go off and think how you would think. Look at some of the world's top dyslexics, from Einstein to Branson to Bill Gates to John Lennon. I'm in the lucky club. It's a really, however, going back to something we talked about earlier, is if everyone in school told me I was thick when I'm not, because I couldn't pass exams because of the way, they were set up. If I'd ended up believing that I was thick and stupid, then that could have destroyed me. And so I could have been destroyed with dyslexia. But fortunately, I somehow managed to have confidence in myself to say, well, I'm not stupid. You guys just don't teach me how I need to learn. And so I'll go off and find another way to do it. But I think that dyslexic people do think differently. They're often very creative and visionary and pioneering. And, we ought to get together and make the world a better place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, David, thank you so much for your time today. Before we end here, is there a last message, a last thought that you'd like to share with my audience?
Yes, I've got two, actually, if that's okay, very quickly. The first is that, we all know the world's in a pretty shocking state at the moment, with lots of terrible things going on everywhere around the world and in our own backyard, in our own economy, our own politics and education system and inflation and mortgages and everything else as well. And the way that we can overcome these challenges through raising our consciousness, and the way we do that is through raising our character. So if you just choose one character quality to work on, per month for the next 12 months, and you started off with curious and open-minded and kind, then you'll notice a dramatic improvement in your life. If anyone is interested in the work we're doing, then the best way to get hold of us is through LinkedIn or through our website. Our website is www.entelechy.academy, and my personal LinkedIn is David C.M. Carter. And be delighted to hear from anybody who was interested in perhaps taking their company on a company of character journey, but also anyone who's interested in looking at developing their own character. You can download the app on a 14-day free trial. And so, yes, if anyone would like to contact me, David C.M. Carter at LinkedIn, or check out what we do at www.entelechy.academy.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I've learned so much. It's given me a real place of reflection on me as a leader, me as a business owner. So thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure over these 2 episodes. Thank you, and I hope to speak to you soon.
Mark, thank you so much.